December 1st, 2012. A freezing morning outside the massive training facility of the Kansas City Chiefs. A 25-year-old rising star stepped out of his car in the facility parking lot, but not to play football. He was armed. Instead of facing law enforcement, he stood there staring down his head coach and general manager. They pleaded with him to drop the gun. He just looked at them and said, "Thank you for everything, but I was not able to get enough help." Then, right before their eyes, he dropped to his knees and ended his life. The sports world was left in absolute shock, but this horror did not end in that lot. It was just the start of a dark mystery. A mystery so grim that exactly 1 year later, his grieving family dug his body out of the ground to find the truth hiding in his brain. Before we break down the grim details of this tragedy, I have a quick question for you. Which city are you tuning in from? And what time is it over there right now? Let us know in the comments below. Now, let us dissect this terrifying story. Let us rewind the tape to just minutes before that horrific parking lot scene. We need to look at a luxury home in a quiet suburban neighborhood. Inside that house, linebacker Jovan Belcher lived with his 22-year-old fiancée, Cassandra. They had welcomed a baby girl just 3 months earlier, and Belcher's mother was living in the house to help care for the newborn. From the outside looking in, it seemed like the ultimate American dream. A wealthy NFL star, a beautiful young partner, and a new baby. But behind closed doors, that dream was spiraling into a terrifying nightmare. On that freezing December morning, a brutal argument broke out between the young couple. They were fighting over something incredibly routine, like coming home late after a concert. It was the type of common dispute that happens in millions of homes daily. But Belcher did not react like a normal person. His mind completely short-circuited. He stepped into the bathroom holding a loaded, heavy handgun. In a flash of unexplainable rage, he fired 9 shots into the woman he loved. The gunfire echoed through the entire house. Just a room away, his mother was cradling his 3-month-old daughter. Hearing the gunshots, she rushed in to find a tragic scene on the bathroom floor. Belcher stared at his actions, but he did not flee in a panic. Instead, he was chillingly quiet. He leaned over and kissed his bleeding fiancée on the forehead. He apologized to his mother, walked out the front door, got into his luxury car, and drove straight to the Chiefs' practice facility. How does a wealthy young athlete destroy his life and his family in just seconds? The answer was buried deep inside his skull. You see, Belcher was never supposed to be an NFL star. When he entered the professional football ranks, nobody believed in him. He was completely passed over in the draft. Front offices ignored him, convinced he was too small and too slow to play linebacker at the professional level. But Belcher was driven to prove those scouts wrong, outworking everyone else on the practice field. He pushed his body far past the normal limits of human endurance. He practically lived in the weight room, molding himself into a powerhouse of pure muscle. Through sheer grit, he forced his way onto the Chiefs roster and claimed his spot as a starting linebacker. It was an inspiring underdog story that the fan base absolutely loved. But make no mistake, playing linebacker is one of the most brutal jobs in sports. The sole purpose of that position is to act as a human wrecking ball, stopping giant ball carriers from moving down the field. We are talking about 250-pound athletes sprinting right at you with elite speed, and your job is to throw your helmet and shoulders directly into their chests to execute the tackle. Doing that just once would leave a normal person with a severe concussion, but Belcher was doing it hundreds of times a week in practice and on game day. He was essentially crashing a car into a concrete wall over and over again without wearing a seatbelt. With every single helmet-to-helmet collision, his brain was violently rattled against his skull. Those constant micro-collisions are the silent killers of the human brain. They slowly tear apart the delicate nerve fibers responsible for emotional control and logical decision-making, but in the hyper-competitive culture of professional football, nobody talks about this invisible damage. The only metric that matters is the final score. When Belcher began to feel the agonizing toll of these impact collisions, the system did not offer rest or comprehensive medical care. There were no real recovery programs for players like him. Instead, team doctors just handed him heavy painkillers to keep him on the gridiron as long as possible. Look at the league today. The culture demands you play through pain. If you complain about a headache or need a break, you are instantly replaced by someone younger and hungrier. Our team of editors tracked his rise, and Jovan knew this brutal reality because he had to fight so hard just to earn his roster spot. Showing any weakness was never an option, so he stayed silent and swallowed the pills. He strapped on his helmet every Sunday, delivering devastating hits for millions of screaming fans. Subscribe now for more deep sports analyses. Team executives and media companies celebrated his violent plays on the field. They paid him millions because he was willing to sacrifice his personal safety to ensure the franchise kept winning games. To the front office, he was the ultimate gladiator, basically human body armor, to shield the highly paid stars behind him. But as you and I know, the tragic reality of being a shield is that eventually, you break. Power players inside the organization cash checks off his physical destruction, choosing to ignore glaring signs of severe brain damage. If this shocks you, subscribe to our channel. He left everything out on that field, but the brutal game was slowly erasing his humanity. By the middle of his 4th year, the silent brain trauma began spilling over into his personal life, creating deep concern for everyone close to him. This was no longer about a player dealing with standard game day soreness. He was dealing with intense cognitive decline and brutal insomnia. He would lay awake for days on end, completely unable to shut down his racing mind. Blinding migraines and scary memory blackouts became a daily struggle. He forgot basic conversations and missed scheduled team meetings. The pressure building in his skull was becoming absolutely unbearable. To silence the chaos in his head, he turned to heavy drinking, desperately self-medicating a brain that was failing him. Like this video if you are following his tragic journey. His whole personality shifted drastically. That quiet, dedicated player transformed into a deeply paranoid locker room presence, constantly on edge, incredibly explosive, and completely unpredictable. He began purchasing firearms, convinced that people were out to get him. Those closest to him realized his emotional filters were entirely gone. Yet the team office did not care about his mental state, as long as he kept making big hits on game day. This brings our timeline back to that freezing December morning. After committing that terrible crime in his own bathroom, Jovan did not flee. He did not pack a bag or try to leave. Instead, he got into his luxury car and headed straight to the very place that caused him so much hidden agony. He drove directly to the stadium, pulling into the training facility parking lot shortly before 8 o'clock in the morning. He stepped out of his vehicle clutching a firearm. Seconds later, the team's general manager, Pioli, walked out of the building and saw him standing there. Pioli instantly recognized the danger, pleading with his player to drop the firearm. Within seconds, head coach Romeo Crennel rushed out to the lot to join them. These were the two most powerful figures in the entire organization. They held total control over his contract and NFL career. Now, they stood only feet away, desperately begging him to stop. They told him they cared, promising they could fix whatever problems he was dealing with. They promised to get him medical specialists and the time off he needed. But Jovan knew those offers came far too late. He stared at the executives who built their careers on his physical sacrifices. He knew they only cared because he was standing on team property holding a gun. His final words to them are absolutely heartbreaking. He thanked them for giving an undrafted rookie the opportunity to live out his dream. He expressed deep remorse for what he did to his young family, then looked at his coaches with one last devastating message. He told them, "I was not able to get enough help." Those were not merely the words of a broken athlete. That was a direct indictment of the entire football establishment. He was saying the machine took everything he had and offered absolutely nothing when he began to break down. As police sirens echoed in the distance, Jovan dropped to his knees in the freezing parking lot. He quietly made the sign of the cross over his chest. His coach screamed one final time to put the gun down, but the biological emergency brake in Jovan's brain had completely failed. Right before the eyes of the men who celebrated his violence on the field, he ended his life. The general manager and head coach were left standing in that parking lot, staring at the tragic cost of their brutal industry. The football machine had officially pushed another one of its gladiators past the point of sanity, but instead of reflecting on this horror, the league immediately began damage control to protect its multi-billion-dollar brand. Subscribe to support unfiltered sports journalism. The parking lot was cleared, and the games kicked off right on schedule the very next day. Business as usual. Right after that horrific tragedy, the league's massive corporate machine went straight into damage control. Officials desperately wanted to avoid tough questions about gridiron safety. They needed this dark story to fade away immediately, so they hijacked the narrative. Suddenly, the media coverage focused solely on his turbulent personal relationship issues. Reports heavily emphasized his heavy drinking habits and the massive financial pressure he was under. The front office painted him as a broken man who just snapped under everyday life stress. They completely washed their hands of his downfall. They wanted fans to believe football had absolutely nothing to do with the horror of that morning. They buried Jovan Belcher, expecting his dark secrets to stay in the dirt forever. But his family refused that convenient corporate narrative. His mother knew him best. She knew the gentle kid she raised did not suddenly morph into a violent monster overnight. He was exceptionally kind before he ever stepped onto a professional football field. She had watched his personality slowly decay during his 4 seasons in the National Football League. She suspected that the violent sport he loved so much was actually the exact thing that destroyed his humanity. But she needed hard scientific proof, so she made an agonizing choice. Subscribe now as we uncover the truth. Exactly 1 year after the tragedy, in December 2013, the family made a legal request to dig his body out of the ground. It was an incredibly eerie and deeply unsettling process. Heavy machinery arrived at the quiet cemetery, pulling dirt from his grave. They lifted his casket from the cold earth and took the remains to a medical facility. The family was not seeking closure. They were searching for one specific organ. They needed to carefully extract his brain and ship it to an independent medical lab for state-of-the-art testing. They packed the vital tissue in ice, sending it to the country's leading neurological experts. They demanded answers that league executives kept hidden. Hit that like button if you want transparency too. If the medical tests came back completely clear, the corporate office would be totally vindicated. The family would look like desperate people blaming a brutal sport for a personal tragedy. But if the doctors found the damage, it would expose a terrifying truth the league had actively hidden for decades. Neurologists took the brain tissue into their lab, carefully cutting it into microscopic slices. They placed those thin samples under high-powered lenses, searching for a silent killer. What they discovered inside his skull completely demolished the narrative that league executives had carefully spun. The ultimate truth was finally unearthed. In September 2014, experts finally released their official autopsy finding. The report was absolutely devastating. It revealed undeniable proof of severe traumatic brain damage. Pathology experts discovered heavy clusters of toxic tau proteins scattered all over his brain tissue. He was officially diagnosed with chronic traumatic encephalopathy. This silent killer was eating him alive and turning his brain into a toxic wasteland. But the most terrifying revelation was exactly where those toxic proteins had settled. The worst neurological damage was concentrated right inside his hippocampus. This was the exact proof they needed. Let's look closer at the science of the human brain to understand why this matters. The hippocampus acts as your biological command center for memory and emotion. This critical area regulates your daily temper and keeps logical reasoning in check. When you get angry, this region acts like an emergency brake to stop you. It forces you to process consequences before making a terrible mistake. But Jovan Belcher no longer had that emergency brake. The years of violent collisions on the gridiron as an NFL linebacker had slowly suffocated his ability to control his own actions. Now, this diagnosis does not excuse the horrific tragedy that occurred in his home. A young mother lost her life, and an innocent little girl must grow up without her parents. That remains an unforgivable reality. But the science forces you and I to view this horror through a different lens. Those 9 bullets were not fired by a cold, calculating criminal with a malicious plan. They came from a broken biological machine. A machine that was systematically damaged by a corporate system that prioritized profit over human lives. The system paid him to destroy his head, then turned its back the moment his brain began to malfunction. This is the ultimate lesson of this disturbing story. Subscribe to follow more cases. This is a tragedy, folks, that stretches far beyond the bright lights of an NFL stadium. Our modern culture constantly pushes these players to sacrifice their physical and mental health for success. They are taught to grind harder, to work longer, and completely ignore the flashing warning signs screaming from their own bodies. You look at the luxury cars and massive mansions, mistakenly believing that big money shields these guys from the brutal toll of extreme stress. But the tragic end of Jovan Belcher teaches us a brutal truth. No amount of fame, money, or success can buy back your sanity once it is gone. A multi-million-dollar contract is completely worthless if you lose your mind earning it. Hit subscribe as we dissect this. When players sell their long-term health to a giant corporate sports machine, they must understand that the league has zero loyalty. They become nothing more than assets on a corporate balance sheet. The system will cheer for you while you make them rich. They will plaster your face on posters and tell you that you are a superhero. But the second you break down under that heavy pressure, they will replace you without a single thought. They will sweep your issues under the rug and keep playing the game as if you never existed at all. We must protect our mental health. So hit that like button. We have to spot these breaking points before it is too late. Because if we let the system push these athletes past the edge of sanity, the fall will destroy everything. Jovan Belcher traded his mind for a massive paycheck and a few short years of glory. Do not let the intense pressure of professional sports turn you into another disposable victim of the machine. Protect your mind. Because once it is gone, the system sure as hell won't be there to catch you when you fall.